Thank you very much, Rick. Thank you. So this is about digital and monopolies. The classic story, of course, of the internet is that guys, basically, mostly guys, of course, usually, in garages are cool and wear T-shirts, or in their dorm are cool and wear T-shirts, or if you're Jack Ma, are cool and walk around and interview English tourists in China, and they're really cool and entrepreneurial and disruptive, and they start a little business and it's really cool, and they sort out some new things, and suddenly they rocket into this hugely dominant position, even though, of course, they're really cool and entrepreneurial and disruptive. And then the actual dominance that they then have does not allow other cool people in garages or dorms or walking around interviewing English tourists in China aren't able to break in to that. Now, is that a problem for the company? Is it real? Is it true? And also, is it actually just a function of the way the internet operates, where you don't need to, build railways or have huge amounts of capital-intensive kit to be an incredibly successful business? If your idea is a brilliant one, then growth is very straightforward, or can be. I am joined by an astonishingly brainy panel. From the right is Adam Cohen, who is also, or formerly, so of course I love you, Adam, a journalist. He is Google's head of economic policy in Europe. He was the economics correspondent for Dow Jones. To his left is Bindi Karia. Now, she is known as the UK Queen of Startups. Formerly at Microsoft, though, interestingly. We'll talk about that, hopefully, a little bit later. She is Vice President of Silicon Valley Bank in London. In the middle-ish is Andrew Keane. I have been reading your book, Andrew. The Internet is Not the Answer, on holidays. And it's a fantastic polemic about the way the internet has developed and how the contrast is between this rather, we're all guys in T-shirts just doing our own thing, but has actually become a force for a lot of bad as well as a lot of good. Andrew, you've been described as the Christopher Hitchens of the internet. I'm not quite sure what that means, although you did say that you have also been described as the Antichrist of the internet, so at least you're improving slightly to Christopher Hitchens. And next, maybe you'll be the sort of David Cameron of the internet, and you can slowly move into becoming the Pope of the internet, and then everyone will love you. And then Frank Pasquale, Professor of Law at the University of Maryland, and author of the book Black Box Society, The Secret Algorithms That Control Money and Information. Clearly a Professor of Law because you're wearing a tie, so that's good. I took mine off. I'm the BBC's business editor. I'm quite dull, but I thought, as I'm now in, trendy East London, I better take my tie off, but I have got it with me just in case there's anyone here from the BBC. So let's kick off. Let's kick off with the actual question. Now, monopolies. I had a bit of a debate about monopolies before we came on, and Adam, as an economics brain box, you said monopoly and dominance, slightly interchangeable. I think we're talking more about dominance than monopolies. But Adam, give me your opening thoughts on this notion about, is dominance a dirty word, and are there threats from the way the internet and businesses on the internet have developed to the way people use the internet and therefore society itself?
Yeah, so I think the definitions don't really matter that much. I think there historically was this idea that really big, very successful, very rich companies could do great things for us. Theodore Vail, who was the chief executive of AT&T 100-odd years ago, said, give me this power and I will do great things for your network. I think that we've have a lot of experience across lots of industries that this is actually not good, that competition is necessary to promote diversity and choice and innovation and quality, those things that we care about if we look at any kind of historical, legal, monopoly case, the actual regulation of these issues. It's tremendously important. Now, if we look at the internet, what we see over the past 15, 20 years, even the past 5 years, is a tremendous pace of change, tremendous changes in the way that people are finding and accessing information, in the way that they're using the internet itself. More than 50% of access to the internet today in Western Europe and in the United States is happening on mobile devices. So I think we have to look very closely for these types of changes, this rapid evolution, to ensure that things are actually functioning well.
Excellent. And what do you think? If we turn, Bindi, to this question about this dominance issue, from where you sit now, supporting and funding startups. Do you see there being a dominance problem?
Well, I think I can come at it from the perspective of having worked in Europe most of my career, but mainly for 3 American companies. And I don't see what the problem is, in the sense that you execute and you deliver and you've got people that like and buy and use your product set. So is it dominance, or is it a case of, you know, incredible execution? And then the other comment I'd make, and I've been chatting to a few friends that have worked in policy and, you know, the various big tech corporates, and what is the tension between innovation and dominance, and can the two coexist, you know, or regulation from this side of the pond?
So do you think, Bindi, that any dominance that is evidenced is simply because that business is very good at what it does?
They're very good at what they do, and more importantly, they're very good. I'm a very basic business person, in the sense that they're very good because people are adopting it. And in today's time and age and era of social media, you know, it's about that kind of adoption. So execution for me.
Yeah. So Andrew, no problem. No problem at all. They're just very good at what they do. Google is a rather nice company, and you should sort of write a different book saying how the internet is the answer.
Look, the issue is not whether they're good at what they do. No one's arguing they're not good at what they do. AT&T was good at what they do. So what? That's not the issue. That's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about whether or not the digital economy lends itself to new, more excessive kinds of monopolies. And those monopolies, I think, are extremely problematic when it comes to both competition and innovation. And as at least I argue in my book, in The Internet is Not the Answer, the internet, ironically, even though it's decentered and distributed and all these other cute words you hear at events like this, it actually lends itself even more to a winner-take-all economy. So companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon are, in many ways, monopolies. We don't have, in almost any space in the digital economy, we don't even have 2 companies. There are winner-take-all economies, and this is bad for entrepreneurs, it's bad for innovators, and it's bad broadly. Now, whether it should be banned, how you deal with it in a regulatory issue is another matter. I'm not arguing that the people there aren't competent. The fact is they're too competent, but that's a problem for all of us.
How did you just be rather less good at your job?
Well, you know, when you say monopolies, it sort of undermines the whole case, right? The idea of monopoly is that you have one, and that there is no competitor to this one.
Yeah,
well, you are a monopoly, though, in Southern Europe. I mean, you have, what, 90% of the search market. What's your control of the search market in the UK?
You're deciding that our only competitors are actually Microsoft and Yahoo, and that all these other services, the diversity that I described earlier, doesn't somehow exert these competitive forces on Google's business. And those competitive forces are doing all the things that we want to see in a well-functioning marketplace. They're forcing us to continue to innovate, to continue to provide new products, and to continue to keep prices low. Those are the classical measures that we have of this.
Do you think, on Andrew's main point, which is that the digital economy, this is not about Google, you're not here as the kind of spokesperson for big companies on the internet, but the digital economy lends itself to natural, let's call it dominance, of one big player in each sector?
I think it lends itself to rapid disruption. I mean, you look at Yahoo 15 years ago. Yahoo was described as having solved search. Yahoo was the dominant player in search. They had the most data. They were the most used. They were the most talked about company in the internet. And a small little company, which is today a very big and successful company, we'll admit it, toppled them almost overnight. And the same process has happened to MySpace with Facebook, and even the existence of services like Facebook hasn't prevented Twitter from emerging and Snapchat, and the next great things are coming down the road. There is no, stopping that process.
So Andrew, what about that? So actually, what you get, yes, you may have some dominance for a period, but given that people can change the services they use in the digital economy very, very easily, that dominance can crumble in the face of better competition.
I think that this idea, which you keep on hearing about, the competition is only one click away, doesn't work. I think there's a really interesting new book by a Stanford professor called Nir Eyal, who talks about, the book is called Hooked, and he talks about the way in which we become addicted to interface. And I had the experience myself with Google. I'm a Google user, and then my browser shifted over to Yahoo. And I was so uncomfortable, I immediately shifted over to Chrome because I was much more comfortable with that interface. I think what we're seeing is more and more people flocking to single platforms. I mean, you're right. There isn't such a thing as a first mover advantage. So you're right. Friendster didn't win. Yahoo didn't win. But no one's going to overtake Google in search, and no one's going to overtake Facebook in social.
You just explained the case of how easy it was to switch from one service to the next, which
It
enables
isn't.
competition.
No, I didn't. No, I said the
You
opposite.
switched your
I said
browser
that
from
it's
Yahoo
really-
to Chrome.
I said that physically it seems easy. Argument of people like you is, oh, anyone could just switch browsers. But the reality, given the habitual nature of interface, is it makes it much, much harder.
Adam, are you going to come back?
I mean, I think Andrew's kind of answered his own problem, right?
Right.
He switched. His preference is Google, it's Chrome, and when the next better thing comes along, you're going to switch again.
Great.
And at zero cost, with zero friction.
Yeah. Frank, what's your feeling about this issue of dominance, and is it a danger, and why does it develop?
Well, I think from the first angle we have to take is it's not just a story about users, it's also a story about advertisers and about the third parties that are affected. And I want to give two examples about making this case more concretely from real legal disputes. One is that we have emails unearthed now in Silicon Valley between top-level people at Google and Apple that were essentially a wage-fixing cartel. With respect to the workers there was anti-poaching agreements. And that case has gone forward. I think it's been settled for hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, this is a very important case that shows anti-competitive impulses with respect to workers at the very core of these firms. If we turn from that US case to the EU statement of objections with respect to price comparison sites, we can see that between 2007 and 2014, the traffic to the leading price comparison sites went down markedly, over 75%, while the traffic to Google's competitor site, the Google Shopping, went up at least 200%. That is a chilling message to entrepreneurs that as long as you do not affect the core business of Google, maybe you'll rise or fall in search results. But here's one object lesson that if you threaten certain core properties, you should watch out because you can be eliminated like that. And my final point would be that so many entities, especially in the media, but beyond there, rely incredibly on Google as the source of their traffic. And I think just as we saw the railroads were incredibly important monopolies, or telecoms, or utilities, and other in previous eras, as enlightened regulators, we have to take on the responsibility of seeing these new digital infrastructures as the new utilities, the new railroads, the new telephones.
And Frank, where does that dominance come from? Do you agree with Andrew that there is something in the way the digital economy operates that naturally leads towards these very dominant companies developing positions?
Absolutely. It is a self-reinforcing data advantage that's at the core of these firms' business models. It was even admitted by Peter Norvig, one of the chief data scientists at Google, who said once, we don't have the best algorithms, we just have more data than everybody else. Okay? And the key to that idea there is that when you look, let's say that we were to search today for a Thai restaurant near Shoreditch Town Hall. Okay? There are certain search engines that get maybe 100 searches like that a week. There are others that maybe get 2 or 3. Over time, if you think about this compounding, this advantage compounding over time, the search engines that get the most results are going to have the most data about refining future results. So this is a rich get richer dynamic that is going to further entrench the big players, the Amazons, the Apples, the Facebooks, the Twitters, et cetera, in each of their respective fields of dominance.
Do you not agree with Adam's point, though, that if we look 5, 10 years ago and look at what were the dominant businesses then, they are very different from the dominant businesses now, and that competitors can come in and undermine what seems like impregnable dominance in the digital world very easily?
I would have to see an example of, say, some search engine displacing Google in a national context in the past 5 or 6 years. I think that when Google took over from Yahoo, there was far less computing equipment at stake. I mean, now there's hundreds of millions of dollars of servers that, say, a startup would have to have. There was far less data there. Now there's far more of a data advantage in the big players. I mean, even look at Quiro, which was this European Union attempt to like develop their own search engine, a rival to the Americans from about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. They had $450 million that were sort of dedicated to that, and it was clearly going to fail. They knew from the outset. We have Microsoft possibly losing $2 billion a year on Bing. They're failing. So I think that that question answers itself, that this is a self-reinforcing dominance that we really have to treat as a new form of utility, not as a competitive field.
Now, Bindi, you work a lot with startups and first and second stage funding rounds. I mean, does the operation of dominant players in the sectors where these new businesses are trying to grow negatively affect the chances of the businesses you're funding?
I can only talk from a personal perspective of the companies that I've worked with, and I would actually boil it down to the traits and the characteristics of the entrepreneurs. They don't see that as a barrier at all, and they will just continue to go and grow and build and try to work the best kind of company or product that they're building. But that's purely from my own perspective of the folks I've worked with.
But they may not see it as a problem, and that's a good thing. Some would argue.
Well,
but is it a problem?
I don't believe so. No.
Right. So they don't. So because the argument is sometimes that the dominant companies will buy up new technologies, either to take advantage themselves of that, or to simply close them down and meld them into their own businesses. Is that a reasonable criticism?
It's a reasonable observation. However, what I'd say is I know of cases of really great companies here in Europe where some of the dominant players have offered to buy them up, and the entrepreneurs and the founders have said, no, we actually believe we can build a bigger, stronger, higher valuation of a business. So I think it really depends on the founder. And those that do and have chosen to sell out, again, the ones that I know that have sold to a Google or a Microsoft, for example, they've done it because they felt there was the right kind of partnership for them and they could grow internally, and they would get the resources they needed to grow their product set. So I think it really depends on the founder from my own experience.
Adam, how do you respond to this notion that actually, yes, 5-10 years ago, it was possible to be the disruptor and to break down old monopolies, but now your position particularly, let's say Google, but for others as well, and Amazon maybe, and others, is so dominant that it is going to be impossible to go through that cycle again?
I think if you look at these firms, they're each other's biggest competitors, and there are new entrants that are coming along and trying to disrupt them as well. You know, it's interesting. If you look at Google's business, there's a huge chunk of our business where we don't make any money. There are no advertisements against queries like, how far is Shoreditch from central London? But if you look at shopping, if you look at travel, if you look at searches for restaurants, there's an enormous ecosystem in each of these areas where there are extremely strong competitors that are doing those things to our business, exerting those competitive pressures, forcing us to innovate, forcing us to keep prices low. That's the crucial stuff that happens in competition, and we have to acknowledge that it exists. Now, to Frank's point that Google is somehow this pipe connecting upstream providers of goods and services to end users, that just doesn't match the reality that we have today. Right? I mean, newspapers made this argument in 2008 and 2009. Today, newspapers get more clicks from Facebook and Twitter than they do from Google.
I'm going to come to the audience for questions in 1 second. I just want to ask, though, Frank, what should we be doing about it if it is a problem, or you say it is a problem? What should we be doing about it, and who should be doing it? Is it governments? Is it regulators? Is it us as consumers?
There's a role for all three. I think that media literacy is key, getting people to try new things and to try new approaches to searches, and to be aware that, say, there can be favoring of Facebook's own interests or Google's own interests or Amazon's own interest in there when you look for things on them. But I think fundamentally you've got to have regulators involved who make sure that, say, when you're searching on Google for something, you're not immediately routed to Google-owned or Google-affiliated properties at the very top of your searches, that there's some room in that prime real estate for exactly the startups that we care about, for them to innovate, for them to get some sort of traction.
Can I add something?
Yep, go on, Andrew.
It's not just a question of, using the example of Google, it's not just a question of Google in search. It's the way in which companies like Google use their dominance in one vertical to build businesses in other verticals, and that's what the regulators in Europe, I think, are rightly looking at. uncompetitive behavior. And the last panel, which was excellent, was on artificial intelligence. That's the next big thing. And Google are massively investing, understandably, like Facebook, like everybody else in it. We have a huge arms race when it comes to artificial intelligence in Silicon Valley. So if they are so dominant in search, and then they use that search domination to strengthen new businesses, that's extremely problematic and needs to be looked at by regulators.
On things like AI, Adam,
He's describing a process where we're entering into an incredibly competitive field. You know, you talk about AI, Facebook, Google, lots of other firms are interested in this. These are all competitive environments, and we have to acknowledge competition where we see it. And whether or not a firm invests its profits...
But not in search, but they're not in search.
There absolutely are. If you look
and
at
search is not just...
If you look at Amazon, Amazon is the big player in shopping. Expedia and Kayak and others are the big players in travel. They are exerting competitive pressure on us. The idea that somehow competition can only come from firms that do 100% of what you do is not correct. It's not the standard that regulators use, and it's misleading.
But search is not just another category. It is the brain of the internet.
Okay, let's have some questions. There's a lady down here and a gentleman there. Are there some mics, I think?
Yeah, yours is very good.
Do you want to come down? There's not much use there, but yeah. Fabulous lady here and a gentleman there. Is it just the one mic? Okay. There's a gentleman over there. Madam, yes.
Hi. Thank you for the discussion. My name is Sophia, and I work at a media tech company called Blasting News. It's a very new company, so we've been going to VCs. And one of the questions that we are asked all the time is, who's going to buy you, Facebook or Google? And essentially...
And who is?
I'm here to take offers. So I wonder what you think about that. Is there something inherently wrong when we're essentially being asked this question, which implies that build your company in order for it to be bought by Facebook or Google?
Yeah. Well, Bindi, give us that one. And then gentleman there.
I wonder who the VCs are that you're talking to, because ultimately the VCs that I've worked with over the years are like, what's your exit strategy? And yes, right now the trend is that there's a lot of acquisitions happening from these big corporates, but you know, a long time ago, you know, it was around markets and IPOs and flotations. So I think it really depends. In the end, the motivation of the VC is to make a return. And whether a Google or a Facebook buy you, or whether it is an IPO, either way, the motivation is about making their return. So how do you make them their money back in multiples?
Frank, very briefly.
That's really what they're after.
Thank you, Bindi.
I just encourage everyone to take a look at the Wikipedia pages for Google and Facebook acquisitions. I think the Google one is over 200 now. It's about 1 or 2 a month. And so it's really a reality check about exactly how dominant they can become over certain fields.
Sir.
Can I ask a question from a slightly different angle? My name's Rupert Gray. I'm an intellectual property lawyer. This is not so much about monopolies, but about the power of the major companies we've been talking about. A couple of years ago, Arkansas in the States...
Yep. A question, yep.
Yeah, it's coming.
Yep.
Passed a law banning gay marriage. As a result of which, Google, Facebook, and other major companies pulled out of Arkansas, stopped doing business there. And so we've there got a situation in which moral issues are being dictated to, or being dictated by corporate interests, in spite of the fact that the democratic process has made that decision. It may be one we disagree with, but that's not the point. So suddenly you've got these companies being more powerful than governments, let alone more powerful than each other. How are we going to address that? I'd like to know Andrew's views on that.
Adam,
Firms
are you too political? You're too powerful.
I mean, firms move around for a range of reasons, and they're entitled to. You know, just as citizens exert their rights, so can companies. You know, the idea that a company needs to stay put when the law changes, and you know, sometimes legal changes are favorable, sometimes they aren't. I don't think that that's a principle that's established anywhere where we have free markets or free people.
Gentleman up there.
It's not true that having longer data sets makes you better at search. All machine learning involves windowing, so having a longer data set isn't making Google better at search. It seems likely to me that what's making Google successful and other firms successful are the same things that are driving us to smaller range of firms in publishing and everywhere else, which is a series of policies that are extremely favorable to investors at the expense of states, workers and other people in their supply chain. And why should we assume that the convergence in digital is sui generis when we're having convergence in energy and convergence in shipping and convergence in all these other areas where these returns at scale, thanks to things like the double Irish and so on, are available to them. Google's not succeeding in other verticals. Look at G+, right? I've got tumbleweeds I can sell you from G+. Google's succeeding at double Irish.
Thanks, Corey.
Thanks.
Yes. Yeah. You're succeeding because you.
Well, this is the key question of market power. This is, can you use your position in general search to leverage your way into shopping or to travel? And the fact is that, yeah, we do have a shopping property. You know where we are in shopping? Here. And you know where Amazon, eBay, and a range of price comparison services, they're all growing just fine.
Yeah, but Amazon and eBay aren't price comparison services.
They are kind of price comparison service. They do perform that function. There's a range of products from across the marketplace.
Well, there's an argument about who you compare yourself to. Yeah, okay. Now, I see Ronan Dunn is down here, Mr. Mobile Guru. Can we get a microphone down here? That'd be fabulous. And then there's a woman at the back there. Brilliant. Ronan, just introduce yourself.
Ronan Dunn, I'm CEO of Telefonica in the UK, or O2. An observation and then a question is, if we're going to have effective competition, which is the alternative to monopoly, we need to find a way that the same service provided by two different parties needs to be treated in the market in the same way. I offer communication services, and I'm regulated on the provision of that. Others offer communication services, and they aren't. So I would say that if we want to have more competition and protect against monopoly, let's have a single level playing field for the provision of services and let the customer decide.
It's asymmetric at the moment, in that Google's in lots and lots of areas where it's not regulated, where you feel you are over-regulated.
Yeah, but let's not we can't just focus on Google. It's not this is not just a debate about Google. That's a great point. I mean, look at. Obviously, he's coming from the position of his company is regulated, but then WhatsApp comes along, gets bought by Facebook for whatever it is, some obscene amount of money, $20 billion, and it doesn't work under the same regulations. I think that question from up there was good. The reality is that the internet economy is no different from any other. And the problem with a lot of our leading internet companies is that they think they're different. This is going to be our debate at the end. And these companies should be treated in the same way, under the same laws, by the same regulators.
Adam, do you want to make a point on that?
I think Ronan makes a very good point. Text messaging and voice calls are competing with services like Skype. They're competing with services like WhatsApp. But the interesting thing is that the telecommunication firms across Europe say that Google's only competitor is Bing. So we have to acknowledge competition where it exists. It's not all like for like. It's not all just the same services exerting competitive pressures on each other. So I very much agree with that view.
Lady at the back there, and then gentleman here.
Hello. I was an intellectual property lawyer for many years, so I'm speaking from a legal point of view on antitrust and monopoly. It seems to me that the problem with monopoly is that it used to be that you could go against, if you had a company that actually sold a product directly against someone like a washing machine or whatever it was, you could say they had a monopoly and the US government would break them up. In this case, because of the nature of the digital world, you're having Google, what product are they actually selling? And I think that's one of the big problems, is that we don't have a legal system that can break up a monopoly because we don't define it legally in a correct way. And I'm just interested in your thoughts on that.
Frank, do you want to kick us off? There's a gentleman down here. I'm afraid I'll be the last one. This guy, who was the guy? You, sorry. Go on, yes, Frank.
So I do think that this question of general purpose search as a definable market is an interesting one, but it is one that the Federal Trade Commission in the US has addressed repeatedly over the past 10 years and sort of has defined separate search advertising markets and other markets. And that actually gets to the point about the questioner who said that search was really a matter of double windowing and the rest rather than the data. All that I can say to that is that it defies common sense to think that if Google has 10 years of email about me and hundreds of thousands of pages of data about me, and then a competing service has none of that information, and I type in ranges of queries, that somehow that competing service will have the data advantage that Google has with respect to this enormous apparatus of surveillance that it has all around me. So I just sort of feel like if you look at the way in which general purpose search has been defined as a market by the FTC, by the EU, other areas, then that is a way to get us to a clarified debate, and it comes out in things like the data advantage that leads to self-reinforcing advantages in search.
I mean, Adam, is it a problem that regulators both geographically and globally find it very hard to pin down digital businesses?
I think that the same tools that regulators have used for over a century in addressing questions of monopoly still apply. What is a company doing, a potentially dominant company doing to quality and innovation? We've seen examples where that subsides very rapidly when firms achieve a position of market power. And what are they doing to prices? We have very, very good tools and powerful tools that the FTC has used and the European Commission has used. And they basically don't agree with what you're saying, Frank.
Right. Sir, last question.
Luke Delaney, former Facebooker and former Googler for full transparency, and now I advise startups on public policy and regulation. And Andrew made an interesting point about there isn't a level playing field, perhaps, or at least it's perceived, but for regulation and the way that services are regulated around the world. But that may well be because the regulations in Europe, for example, are actually more about slowing down innovation and protecting established businesses on a country-by-country basis, and that we would do a lot better by liberalizing and freeing up the telecoms companies to be more competitive with WhatsApp, rather than trying to stop WhatsApp from breaking down or challenging established European industries. So monopoly is a dirty word used at American companies, but global success stories when we talk about Europeans, and the European digital single market plan that's just been published has been said, we want to celebrate and create a European digital single market. How can we limit American platform companies? Which is just madness. So should we not be liberalizing regulation rather than trying to shut down the big successful international players?
Is that a problem? Are we just basically trying to regulate against success?
I don't think that's the case. And I mean, isn't WhatsApp Facebook now? So shouldn't we call it Facebook? And then sort of talk about sort of having this clash of the titans between the telecoms and Facebooks, et cetera. I think when we look more deeply, it's not a question of competition, it's a question of cooperation. And the closer you look at the big content, big media, big telecoms, and big internet, they are getting closer and closer together, I think often to the detriment of startups and consumers.
Andrew, final thought?
Final thought is, think historically. Back in the mid-90s, we had a company, Microsoft, that had the same sort of power as some of these companies today. They were taken on, they were broken up, and that enabled remarkably new innovative companies like Google and Facebook. I think we've come full circle, and the real benefit for entrepreneurs, and this lady at the front I think made the point, is that we need more regulation, more regulatory investigation of these new dominant companies for the benefit of both innovation and entrepreneurs.
Bindi, you're at Microsoft.
I was.
Final thought?
I would disagree.
Microsoft was beaten over the head. Microsoft was the Standard Oil of the 1990s.
I lived through the period of regulation. So I was there from 2005 to 2012. So internally, I witnessed the organization transform. And I witnessed how the type of language we would use when we were in external sales situations were frowned upon. And towards 2012, it was absolutely a sackable offense. And I think it's a truly different company now. So my comment would be, can regulation and innovation coexist?
Well, it can. It changed Microsoft, so maybe it is successful.
I don't think so.
Adam, final thought. You've got regulators breathing down your neck in Europe.
Yeah,
How comfortable is that?
I think that regulation and government scrutiny is absolutely, comes hand in hand with success, and companies should not, buck against that. I think that, we have to examine the data and have rational discussions about where competition actually exists. Big is not by nature bad. And if consumers have choice, if they continue to benefit from innovation, and they aren't stuck using products, then, well, Andrew's amused, but he switches very easily between his different browsers.
He loves it.
Is Peter nodding? Thanks. It's good to have fans. But look, I think let's examine the data. Let's have a rational conversation. I don't think we should use rhetorical tricks to say big is bad and therefore these companies are bad.
Excellent. What a great panel. Adam, Bindi, Andrew, and Frank. Thanks very much.
And thank you very much to Kamal for his excellent chairing there. Round of applause for Kamal, please.